Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show. Do you hear the extra punch in my voice? Yeah, you should. Zoran Mamdani won in New York City. And I am so excited about that. I cannot see straight. I'm so happy that this progressive who went from 1% name recognition to surging in the past few weeks. We're going to talk about that. We've got to talk about that. Why and how did that happen? People are likening this to the Dinkins campaign of '89, but there's context for that. And someone who was in the thick of that fight, Jeff Cohen from Roots Action, is with us. Indeed, Roots Action were the first major group to endorse the Democratic nominee for mayor of New York, the nation's biggest city. I'm so excited. Wow, maybe I need to punch up like this every day. But this is very exciting to me. The Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. Ronnie Patrice. This means that we can replicate this everywhere. But we heard this November 3rd, 1983. Yes, I'm going back to the Jackson campaign. He said, as of this day, nothing is the same. And that has been true. By the end of that cycle, you had a woman on the ticket. You had a black progressive, and the progressive perspective. Bernie Sanders reminded me on my show, maybe about 10 years ago. He said many people make a lot of the fact that Jesse Jackson broke the color barrier. He said, but he broke another barrier. It wasn't just a phenotypic one, it was a philosophical one. Because it enabled white progressives to get into the mainstream. He mainstreamed everybody who was in the margins. And we're carrying on. And that's where, Jeff, and Ronnie, we can talk about the '89 campaign of David Dinkins, because it was a direct outgrowth of the Jackson campaign. We said we lost the state. That's what Reverend said. He said, but we're going to come back and we're going to take the city, which was a big thing to say that night, because that meant we were going after Ed Koch. We put him on notice. And we won. Zoran Mamdani put the Democratic establishment on notice. And he won.
Yeah.
So now you've got the former White House press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, who's saying, I'm an independent now. You've got Joy Reid, who's saying, I'm barely holding on to being a Democrat. I'm not shading anyone. I'm saying that this is the zeitgeist, but there's some people, it's the zeitgeist, excuse me. But there are some people who've been pushing the boundaries. They're not looking at parties as much as they're looking at people. What Mr. Mamdani is talking about are things that people need. New York City needs workers, but the workers can't live in New York City. It's too expensive. He's coming up with real solutions that are fighting the oligarchs. They have said, look, if he wins, we're out of here. Well, then go. That's what I say. Yeah, I said it. And I'll add more to it before I take anything away. Meet me on Blue Sky, santitajackson.bsky.social, santitajackson.bsky.social, and at Santita J on X, at Santita J on X. And guess what? I am on YouTube, the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. Hey, everybody, like and share. And I'm on Facebook, Santita Jackson and Friends. So let's get right to it. Ronnie Patrice, I'm going to start with Jeff Cohen, because Roots Action saw something that many people did not see. Wait a minute. Now let's go back. They also said that Joe Biden, don't run Joe. People went after them. They said, no. We support the Democratic proposition, given that this is a binary system. Okay. And they took some heat for Mr. Mamdani. But you know what? It turns out you were right. In a minute, I'm going to make you Mr. Cleo. I'm going to make you that prophet. Okay, Jeremiah, Joshua, I'll be biblical if you like. But talk to me.
Yeah.
You see, why did Roots Action endorse this man who had 1% name recognition? What were you thinking?
Well, we knew him as a state legislator. We knew about the power of Democratic Socialists of America in Queens. Remember, it's so important that you talk about how one candidate builds, grows based on what someone earlier had built. I mean, AOC won in Queens, Bronx. She defeated the guy who Nancy Pelosi had already tapped to be her replacement as Speaker of the House, Joe Crowley in Bronx, Queens. And that was in 2018. And then in 2019, there was this campaign for Tiffany Caban, a public defender in Queens who was queer. And she ran a completely progressive campaign and she nearly won. In fact, we thought she'd won and she lost by 60 votes in a recount. So we knew what was happening in Queens, New York City, and what was happening in Brooklyn, New York City. If you look at the maps that the New York Times have colorized, I mean, progressives basically are hard to beat in Queens and Brooklyn, which is, these are racially diverse places with a lot of young people. So we knew that he would be formidable. I've got to be honest, I didn't think he would win the Democratic primary, but he did. He built the most miraculous campaign I've ever seen in my life. And as you know, Santita, I was with your dad in 1988. I was with Bernie when he ran for president. I've never seen anything like that. I've never seen a campaign in one city with 40,000 volunteers knocking on more than 1 million doors. I've never seen a candidate, Jesse was such a charismatic candidate with such great proposals. And as you said, he mainstreamed the issue of gay rights. He mainstreamed the issue of Palestinian justice. He mainstreamed so many issues, economic justice. He was out there with the farmers in Iowa speaking up for family farms. So you had this charismatic candidate in New York City who is giving all the right policy programs for, there's food deserts in New York City. Let's get city subsidized grocery stores, one in each of the boroughs, to compete with the profit-making stores. Let's have no-cost childcare. Let's have free bus service. And why could he say that and not be left out of the room? Because as an effective state legislator, Zoran Mamdani had set up this pilot. He got money for a pilot project in New York City on a couple bus lines free. And all of a sudden, bus traffic went up, car traffic and congestion went down. And that was a pilot project that state legislator Zoran had pulled off from Albany, the state capital. And it's believable that if you do free, fast buses, our buses are notoriously slow in New York City, people will come up, working people will have a way to get to work on time. So he had programs that it was all about affordability and, of course, freezing the rents. So it was an amazing campaign. He's one of the greatest candidates I've ever seen. And I saw Jesse up close and I saw Bernie up close. Zoran is a force of nature. The Democrats aren't just worried that he's going to win in November. And by the way, there's obstacles to that. They aren't just worried he's going to become the mayor of New York City. They're worried that Zoran's win will be replicated elsewhere and that Zoran himself will start playing a major role in national politics. You know how he's standing behind the immigrants. There's going to be a real standoff between Trump and Zoran if he becomes mayor, because right now we have a mayor, a corrupt mayor in New York City, Eric Adams, who's in the bag for Trump and is giving up letting ICE do what it wants. That's not going to happen with Zoran. And so it's an amazing victory. I wept with joy, literally, when he gave his 20-minute acceptance speech last night. I haven't talked to any. I've been in touch with dozens of people today, and we're all on cloud nine. We knew it was going to be close, but he's really beaten Cuomo severely, so severely that Cuomo may not run as expected in November. He's on the ballot with something that he calls the Fight and Deliver Party, which most of us are saying the Fight and Deliver for AIPAC and the landlords and the corporate interest party. But no one's sure he's even going to run and stay on the ballot. So this was a monumental, shocking victory.
But Jeff Cohen, before I pivot to you, Rania Patrice, because I know you are bursting at the seams, and we all are. it seems like some ships have sailed. And we were saying this, Rania, when we were, well, let me pivot to you, Rania, just very quickly. I know your time with us is limited. When we were just outside of Washington at the DNC meeting, and let me say, Jeff Cohen, I was at the DNC meeting supporting Dr. James Ogby, because I just don't even know what to say. I mean, when I hear Karine Jean-Pierre and Joy Reid and all these other people who are talking about the Democrats, we've been saying this all the time, but we've been in the fight a long time. So when you tell Joe Biden to run, it wasn't not to run. You were not saying, I'm throwing the Democrats under the bus. You were saying, wait a minute, if you want to win, this is not going to work. And whenever you raise up that issue, Ronnie, you know the beatdown we got, what was it, in February?
Yeah.
And it's
before, for some
kept,
of us, even before that, for some of us.
Talk to us, because we kept saying, you're not listening to the people.
Mm-hmm.
Talk
yeah. To me. I mean, I think that's exactly, and you and I've talked about this a million times, and Jeff, I know you have as well, but we never learn the right lessons. I am saying we as Democrats, even though I have been bucking the establishment my whole life and career, but the right lessons are never learned, and we're already seeing that with Zohran too. It's really ridiculous. But we saw it, to your point. I mean, there were those of us in 2021 and 22 saying this man cannot run again. He said he was going to be the transitional candidate. They were the words out of his mouth. And then we were bad Democrats and we wanted Donald Trump to win and all the name calling and all the things. And frankly, I don't care anymore. Call me whatever you want. Go nuts. I don't care. I really don't. I helped build this party like y'all did too. Oh my goodness, more so than even myself. I feel like we have the right to have feelings and opinions. And to your point, Santita, we care so much about this country and this party that we said this man who we know is going to lose cannot run. That's my issue with this whole thing, is you're calling us all these names and you're acting like we're in service of anything but, frankly, humanity and the country. And again, our party, for me, humanity and country and, world first. But I'm a Democrat because I believe that, you've heard me say this a million times, because I thought that's who we were, the party of humanity and equity and diversity and justice. That's why I identified as a Democrat from a very young age. And so, this is we're seeing the same themes play out even today, as we're all frankly rejoicing, and we know how hard it's been I shouldn't project this. For me, it's been a little hard to feel hopeful lately. I woke up with hope. I went to sleep with hope. Zohran is not only did he run a phenomenal campaign, he is a phenomenal human being. Mm-hmm. And my God, isn't that nice to see? And he did. There were a lot of people in his ear saying you're to use different words, to not be so him, to you're doing too many things, you're saying too much. And he was like, yeah, thank you, but no thank you, in his lovely, very loving Zohran way. And he met people where they are. Yeah. And he walked the length. He walked all 5 boroughs. He walked the length of New York City. He literally met people where they are. He spoke to people. And the thing that I know we've all been talking about collectively, again, at where our party has failed over and over, we can't just be anti-Trump. We can't just be anti the pain that's going on. Everybody's suffering. People are feeling it in so many real ways. We have to be for something. We have to have a vision. And that is what he brought forward. He brought forward a vision and a plan. And yes, he spoke to the pain. And yes, he said, I see your pain and I hear, and it's real. And let me tell you how I want to make your life better. Not let me tell you what a POS Donald Trump and Eric Adams and Andrew Cuomo are, which they are, to be clear. But also, that's not a message. They're terrible, and that end of sentence period is not a message. So anyway, I am going to keep banging this drum, and I know y'all are too, that this is the lesson to be learned. Authenticity, which can be so buzzy, like, how do we make you authentic, is the most absurd thing ever. No, you just are, right? Yeah. And meeting people where they are and having a real message and a real vision for how life is going to be made better if you elect us and not them.
But I mean, to your point, I mean, like his pilot program about public transportation, Jeff Cohen. Would you please explain that to people? Because Rania, Jeff Cohen, people do not think that that is possible. And I'm like, wait a minute. I think about at the height of COVID, one of the things that used to break my heart, I live on a main street. And fortunately, I'm part of the group of workers who could work from home. Okay. Which really puts you near the top because I had to go in for one or two things, but not really. Not really. To see people on that bus stop at 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 in the morning, when people are really literally trying to figure out, okay, do I have enough change to get on the bus? People are living, their margins are tight. And he is speaking to that, Jeff.
Yeah, and his program isn't just for free buses, but free fast buses. And he tells the story of how, I think when he was in college, he came to New York City at age 7. He's an immigrant from Uganda, from Africa.
That's right.
And
well, they do have a substantial Indian population. So
oh yeah, because it was part of the British Empire. But
yeah.
So he tells the story how he'd miss the bus and he would just run and he'd catch up to it every time when he was on his way to high school. And if you can't count on good, fast, free or cheap public transportation, then working people are screwed in a city like New York. You can't have a car here. It costs more to park it than to rent an apartment. So it's an amazing program. He was smart. Everyone knows what he did. Everyone in New York knows what he did for the cab drivers. Everyone knows what he's doing for the halal vendors, the food vendors on the streets. So he's got this track record, as Rania said, meeting people where they are. So, I mean, it's very exciting. This is the page has turned. We're looking at the future. We know what the Democratic corporatists are going to do. They're going to try to come back at.
Well, no, explain what they're going to do, because I think.
Well, I think what's going to happen is what happened to Bernie in 2020. You'll remember that Obama, behind the scenes, got corporate centrist Democrats like Klobuchar and Buttigieg to quickly leave the race so that Biden would be able to take down Bernie.
And I think out the race. You know what? I'm putting it out right out there. He made phone calls and the establishment made phone calls and they pushed Bernie out the race. They doused the flames. This is someone who, if on a rumor, you've heard me say it many times here, 50,000 people would show up. If you heard that Bernie was in town in the winter in Chicago.
Yeah. And right. I mean, Bernie and AOC with their Fight Oligarchy tour are pointing the way for how you become a Democratic Party that wins elections. You speak to the needs of working class people, the poor, and the struggling middle class. That's 90% of us. And there's AOC and Bernie are two of the biggest fundraisers in the history of the Democratic Party, all from small donors. They've shown that you don't need the donor class. You don't need the billionaire class. You can do it by getting middle class and working class people to make small donations.
But Jeff, then why is the party running away from them? Why do you put Kamala Harris on the road? You need to she should have been on the road with Bernie and AOC and the people that he's been endorsing, not with Liz Cheney.
Right. Well, again, the donor class and the consultant class dominate the establishment wing of the Democratic Party, and they don't go down without a fight. Your dad learned this, Bernie learned this. So they're going to keep fighting. What do we think they're going to do between now and November? Is they're either going to see about supporting Eric Adams, who's scandal plagued, and the name of his party is the Anti-Semitism Party, which makes me laugh.
Are you serious right now?
Yeah, no, I'm totally serious. I mean, you've got one, Cuomo, the Stand and Deliver Party, and the Fight and Deliver Party, and the other is the Fight Anti-Semitism Party. It's a joke. It's pure pandering. I don't have to tell you about recent polls, but the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs last month did a poll of U.S. Jews, 30% of whom believe that Israel's committing genocide. That's 30% of US Jews. And people under 44 that are Jewish in the US, 38% believe Israel's committing genocide in Gaza. Now, if you go to people under 25 who are Jewish in this country, it's probably 50%. That's why it's sheer lunacy when we're told constantly by CNN, MSNBC, NPR, that when Jewish students hear people chanting about genocide in Gaza, it makes them uncomfortable. No, half of the US Jewish students believe it. And many of them, including my daughter, are chanting it. So to get back to what are they going to do, they're either going to decide, they're going to do all sorts of polling in the next week or two, all sorts of focus groups, decide if Cuomo is possible. And if he is, they're just going to twist his arm and say, you have to run. If they think Cuomo and Eric Adams split up the vote and that Adams might be somewhat viable, they'll get Cuomo out. But we know behind the scenes, they're going to fight and fight and fight. And I know, Santita, you're very familiar with India Walton,
Absolutely.
Who's on Roots Action staff. She won the Democratic primary in June for the mayor of Buffalo, open Democratic Socialist, and then all the billionaires, all the real estate people, right-wing racists like Carl Palladino, a racist who's more racist than Trump and is a Trump supporter. They pooled their money and they ran the most expensive write-in campaign so that India, who was the Democratic nominee in a Democratic city, could not win in November. So they've got stuff up their sleeve. They're going to try to figure out who's the best way of defeating Zoran Mamdani in November, and that's how they're going to play it. I believe the campaign, the grassroots campaign, is just too powerful to be defeated, but they're going to come at us. And, I watched the NBA playoffs on Channel 7, New York City, WABC. Every commercial break was a smear of Zoran.
Really?
Paid for by the dark money groups behind Cuomo.
Which was Bloomberg, Ackman.
Yes, those two.
Bloomberg, Ackman, I think were the biggest contributors.
And the landlord association, the real estate lobby. But it was something to behold that you knew if a coach called a timeout, you were get an attack ad against Zoran on Channel 7 in New York City. But it didn't work. I mean, young people don't, they may watch the NBA, but they don't get their news. They don't watch mainstream legacy TV. Social media is what propelled him and this young movement to victory.
But I'm going to have to drop. I just want to leave with one little tidbit that I think is really incredible and important. And that is that, of all of these things, it's all amazing and beautiful. And he tapped into low propensity voters and first time voters and I think it was actually 50,000 volunteers that they kept engaged and moving and just were so wonderful with their ground game too. And I think it's really important to point out that Zoran won Hakeem Jeffries' district and Dan Goldman's district. I'm just going to put that out there. Do with it what you will. I know what I would like to do with it.
What do you want to do with it? Don't leave me. Don't leave
pry
me.
me the hell out of those two. That's what I want to do with it.
Oh, don't leave me this way. Come on, remember that Thelma Houston song? It was probably before you were born, but it was a big hit in '76. Don't leave me this way. But
it's like two terrible Democrats who he won their districts, and if that doesn't tell us a lot of things, I don't know what does. But really, I think the establishment is sick of the and I mean the voters. I don't mean actually the consultant class and all that. The establishment is sick of the establishment, and people are sick of it. And we're seeing it play out. And my God, if Hakeem Jeffries and Dan Goldman don't get it together, which I'm not counting on them to do, let's come at them. That's all I'm going to say. And also all the love to both of you, and obviously very excited.
Love you, Ronnie Patrice. Love you, love you, love you, love you.
Love you.
My girl. But you know, Jeff Cohen, I want us to do a deep dive on this, because you have lived and you've made the history. And I think it's important, and I just thank God that you've been able to live through several different iterations from the Jackson campaign. We had to really navigate through the Clinton years. Then you get to Bernie, who just kept saying, he was so progressive. Finally, he just said, look, forget it. I'm running. And he and Trump tapped into the zeitgeist, and the political landscape was changed. If the Democrats had not pushed him out in 2016, I think we'd be looking at a very different country, because he not only was competing with Trump, he was besting Trump.
Right.
He was. Let's step back to Mamdani and who he is, and what is his platform, because I think it's something that I think Brandon Johnson, the mayor of Chicago, they resonate. They resonate, and you see Brandon Johnson beginning to make some traction, because he's had a very, very hard time, but he too has had the corporate media be against him, and you've seen the Republicans move into really fill in a vacuum left by the Democrats in the Black community in particular, and he's had a very, very hard time. What is Mamdani standing for? And because I need you to help me to understand this surge over the past couple of weeks.
Yeah,
they said he's closing in, and in the last 2 weeks it's just like, ow.
Yeah, and by the way, 1/4 of the early voters were first-time voters. So, your dad expanded the electorate. Zoran has expanded the New York City electorate in an amazing way. So did Dinkins. But Zoran, this has been really incredible that 1/4 of early voters were first-time voters. So
why do you think that happened? What happened? Did people start registering? What happened?
Oh, yeah, they did a lot of registration, and they got a lot of young people that either were alienated or were too young to vote the first time, but they got all these young people active, and they got a lot of people that just, poor working class people that just didn't pay attention to politics. Again, they were going door to door. They started that months ago. They started that when you could still register to vote in this June election. But the program was pretty clear, and I think everyone sort of understood what he was saying. He's going to put a freeze on the rent stabilized apartments. He's going to have these city-owned subsidized grocery store, one in each borough. We have 5 boroughs in New York City. He was going to have no-cost childcare. And how is he going to pay for this? He's going to raise the corporate tax rate in New York City to what it is in New Jersey, and for people that are over $1 million a year in income, we're going to get a 2% surcharge. And that would bring in an awful lot of money to do these things. And so it was a very popular program. How can we connect the Don't Run Joe campaign that Roots Action waged month after month after month, and Santita, you supported us. How can we connect that to Zoran? Well, as soon as Trump won in 2024, Zoran went out on the streets of New York City with a video camera. And he found some of these people were somewhat sheepish and embarrassed to admit, and it was a very diverse group, that they'd voted for Trump. And he said, why? What do you think Trump's going to do? And so, a couple of them said, well, I can't defend Kamala because of the genocide. That's why I voted. or I couldn't defend the genocide and Kamala sticking with Biden. That's why I stayed home. But a few of them said, look, the Democrats have been in power. They always make promises. They never keep them. I took a chance with Trump. And Zoran's out there meeting these dozens of working class people of every ethnicity. And basically, I have to believe that the people he met on the streets that heard what his program was, because he was telling them, these were Trump Zoran voters. They'd voted for Trump last year in November, and they voted for Zoran this month in New York. So it was a good program. It was a funded program. It was a program, and his campaign was largely positive. He ran alongside Brad Lander, who came in third. Brad Lander is Jewish. They have slightly different views on Israel, though Lander is a critic of Netanyahu, that's for sure.
He was at the ICE detention center.
Yes, he's the one who was arrested at ICE. He's a good progressive guy. He's not totally progressive on Israel, but he's a good critic of what Israel's been doing in Gaza and a good critic of Netanyahu. So you had a Muslim and a Jewish American campaigning together and cross-endorsing. So he's good. Zoran is great. He's a completely authentic person. He reminds me more of your dad than Bernie, because he's very charismatic. He's always smiling, laughing, loves to talk to people. Bernie, who I also love, is very gruff. He's not a glad hander like other politicians. Well,
but that's his personality, and I think people have to understand that about him.
Yeah, it's just personality. But Zoran's got a not only a winning program, but a winning personality. He recorded these rap videos and people are making fun of him. But he loves to laugh. He loves people. He loves New York City, his adopted home. I encourage anyone to watch his YouTube videos. He started doing them from day one when he announced, and that was October 23rd of last year. Then when Trump wins, he does this video seeking out Trump voters. AOC, by the way, did the same thing on her social media. If you voted for Trump, explain to me. I want to know. And, a lot of them said, hey, I voted for you. If you're in my district and you voted for Trump, I want to know why. And a lot of them would say, I voted for you, AOC, as well as voting for Trump. So, people that are progressive populists, they want to know why are working people of all colors some of them veering toward Trump. And unless you talk to people and listen to people, you won't understand that. But his videos are great. His mom, Zoran Mamdani's mom, is a famous, internationally known filmmaker. Her name is Mira Nair, and she directed Monsoon Wedding. Right. She directed Mississippi Masala, starring a very young Denzel Washington. So Zoran is a master. Not only does he have a great personality, and authenticity is hard to fake. He's completely sincere. So is Brad Lander. And that's what they would say when they were campaigning together. We just believe in sincerity. Say what you believe. Tell people if you disagree with them. Don't say one thing to one group and another thing to another group. So Zoran is a natural, and he took New York City by storm. And I know, my daughter was in the campaign. All of her friends were in the campaign. Yeah, but I mean, my daughter is 28. All of her friends, both of my daughters live in Brooklyn. Everyone they know of their age voted for Zoran, and many of them volunteered for Zoran. So this was a youth movement. It shows how the Democratic Party can defeat Trump. What
did they see? I mean, because the Democrats are going right past us, like they're going right past your daughter and these kids, and they're out here. What is it? Because your daughter, these children, my nieces and nephews, my godchildren. I had Jonah Cars from If Not Now. Thanks to you, you have introduced me to a whole new generation of these young activists, and I absolutely adore them. I'm their Auntie Santita because I'm so old, right? And so Jonah was exasperated on the show one day, and he is just such a wonderful young man. And he said, "Look, everybody, stop. I don't want the world that you have, and I'm not going to have it. I'm not going to have a genocide in Gaza. I'm not going to have hunger here." I mean, he went through this whole list, and everybody just froze on this show.
Yeah.
And I said, "That's it." He said, "I've had a black president. I've had this. I've had all of that, and now I'm done. I'm over it. I want real change."
Yeah.
Would you tell me what? Because you talk to your child now.
Yes. Well, I've got a feeling, my view is the long view, which is, I grew up in the 60s, the 50s and 60s in Detroit. And in Detroit, there was horrible racial discrimination and oppression. But in the 50s and 60s, in the 50s, 1 out of 3 workers was in a union. In the 60s, the ratio of, if you were a typical worker, the CEO of your company, had an income that was 30 times, 25 times yours. Now it's more than 300. So what we had beginning in the late 70s and starting heavily and getting sped up by Reagan in 1981 is neoliberalism, predatory capitalism, just attacks on unions, offshoring of jobs. Your dad was one of the great advocates against NAFTA. So you had all of these programs.
And so were you.
Yes.
And so were you.
Yes. But keep in mind that both parties were part of neoliberalism. Wall Street was deregulated by President Clinton. NAFTA passed under President Clinton. Obama bailed out the banks, but didn't bail out the homeowners. And most of, disproportionately, it was African-American families that lost their homes in 2009 and 10. So we've seen this neoliberalism. It's predatory capitalism. It's evil capitalism. And my kids' generations, that's all they've known. When I went to college in 1969, University of Michigan, public university, the tuition was so low. The dormitory life was so low. Now it's almost unaffordable. And if you go to college, you come out with all this debt. So my kids are growing up in a world that's very different than when companies respected unions, when there wasn't this huge division between rich and poor, when the middle class was actually growing as it did in the 50s, 60s, and 70s in Detroit, including the black middle class was growing. There was segregation, but the white and black middle class was growing. Well, that all stopped when neoliberal predatory capitalism was instituted at the end of the 70s, and especially with the beginning of Reagan, continued by Clinton and Obama. So my kids and that generation, that's all they've known is an economic system where the wealth and income gushes to the top 1% while everyone else suffers, including my daughter, middle class family. They suffer. They just don't know what it's like to have an economy where a middle class is growing and there's actually an American dream. They've seen an American nightmare. So young people are completely turned off to Biden, to Kamala, to the Schumers, but they are excited about AOC and Bernie. So it's not an age thing. He's one of the older ones. They're excited by someone who will say, I've got an answer, a solution to predatory neoliberal capitalism. And that's that we need an economy, a government that forces the economy to work for the majority and not just the top 1 or 2 or 3%.
We're talking with Jeff Cohen, rootsaction.org. They were the first major organization to endorse Mr. Mamdani. Oh, wow. In New York City. What does that mean? They've had it right on so many things. They had it right on Don't Run, Joe. They were not anti-democratic party. They wanted us to win. They said, you're not winning. You're not going to win this way. At Mr. Mamdani, they said, you know what? I see something. I don't care if you only 1% of you know him. Once you do get to know him, you're going to want to vote for him. And of course, the attacks are going to come, Jeff Cohen. They do. And I think we need to be prepared for them. That having been said, I saw him in that big debate when everyone asked them about Israel. You know, will you be taking a trip there? And he really held fast. Said, no, my concern is New York City. And it's not that you're not concerned about what's happening in the Middle East, but even that question, even in this time, that sounded, it was so far afield in 2025. And I mean, can you help me with that?
Yeah, I think I watched it. It was not easy to watch. Zoran, said, "Do you defend Israel's right to exist?" And he says, "I defend Israel's right to exist with equal rights for all," which, of course, is the position that all of us take. We want equal rights for Palestinians, and they are now under the heel of Israel. Everyone knows it. What's going to be interesting if they keep bringing up Israel, and I don't think it's going to fly because it's been handled. He's discussed it. As you say, his answer is, I'm running to be the mayor of New York City. And this mythology that all Jews stand with Israel and Netanyahu is completely wrong. The polls show how many U.S. Jews are critical of Israel. Pew, in April, 69% of Democrats have a negative view of Israel. That includes many, many Jewish Democrats. So Brad Lander has got a slightly different position on Israel, and he will be campaigning with Zoran. If you watch, I encourage everyone in your audience, they'll be weeping in joy to watch the 20-minute acceptance speech from Zoran, the victory speech last night. 20 minutes. It's easy to find. And he brings Brad Lander up on stage, the New York City comptroller, with a good record, defending immigrants, defending workers. And they're arm in arm. He brought Brad Lander up before he even brought his wife and parents up on the stage. So I'm optimistic. Rania raised an interesting point about Jeffries and Goldman and all these Democratic establishment figures who seem more concerned about standing with Israel than standing with the U.S. working class. We are going to be demanding that these Democratic leaders, two of whom live in New York City, Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries, we want to see them immediately endorse the Democratic nominee. It'll be made official on Tuesday when all the ranked choice voting is tabulated and Zoran goes over 50%. That'll probably happen Tuesday or Wednesday. And if these two Democratic leaders don't endorse the Democratic nominee for the mayor of their city, our view is they should get out of the Democratic Party and let new leadership take over.
So you're demanding that Goldman and Jeffries endorse
Schumer.
Okay, Schumer, excuse me. How do you, I guess you'll just demand that they do it.
Oh, yeah. And again, they're leaders of the National Democratic Party. This was an open debate. You witnessed this was an open primary. You witnessed one of the debates, and one guy won resoundingly. And if Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries, who are so funded by AIPAC, if they feel alienated from the Democratic Party, let them leave. Zoran won the election. And if they can't endorse the Democratic nominee in their city, they should get out of the leadership of the Democratic Party and go somewhere else.
When an endorsement from the Democratic leadership brings what? And I'm asking you these questions. So you're like, well, Santita, why are you asking me this? I think it's important for us to help people to really understand how the system works, because Jeff Cohen, when you and Reverend entered into presidential politics 40 years ago, we did not really know we didn't know going in what we knew coming out.
Yes.
84. And there are a lot of little things that happened. When the Nation magazine endorsed Reverend in 88, it opened up the white progressive world. We already had Bob Borsage and other people. But then you had Mark Steitz who said, okay, I'll pivot from this campaign that doesn't work. You see what I mean? I mean, it was just, it was very, we had John Nichols from 83, 84. Don't get me, that's important. But I'm saying it can be a game changer, yes?
Yes. And don't forget you had back in the 80s, Dr. Barry Commoner, the great environmentalist.
Absolutely. And Bernie Sanders, Mayor Bernie.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's right.
And Carolyn Kasdan, don't get me started. You know,
but so I think that if Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries quickly either endorse or are forced to endorse the Democratic nominee, it just projects strength. It projects that this guy can't be beat. It tells the wealthy, you can't beat him. Even Chuck Schumer, who's always been the senator from Wall Street, you know, if Chuck Schumer's endorsing him, it could diffuse some of the opposition. Schumer's endorsement might help with some Jewish voters that are on the fence. But again, I don't want people to think that Jewish voters in New York are all defending the genocide, because there's a huge number of them that are getting arrested, including my daughter, for opposing the genocide and standing with these students who are being deported because they criticize the genocide in Gaza. So none of these voting blocks are uniform. You know, they're not voting blocks anymore. And so it's just going to be fascinating to see. I know the billionaires are calling Schumer and Jeffries today to say, you know,
saying what? What do you think?
I think they're telling them, we want you to distance yourself from Zoran Mamdani, even though he's the nominee of your party. It's going to be an intense struggle in the next couple of weeks. I'm looking forward to it because, you know, you can't defeat organized money unless you have organized people. And no one has organized the city of New York like Zoran Mamdani. Mm-hmm. You know, when they ask him what mayors, you know, does he look back? You know, we had a great mayor in the 30s in New York City, Fiorello LaGuardia. And LaGuardia was very socialist inclined. And he was hugely popular with every ethnic group. And so we've got this proud tradition in New York City. It was stunning to see some of these unions who should know better supporting Cuomo over Mamdani when Cuomo had not, you know, he doesn't walk picket lines. Zoran walks picket lines. So, and you know what was an important endorsement, and it was, as a Detroiter, I was so proud. Sean Fain, the head of the UAW, did a wonderful 5-minute video about how Zoran had stood with UAW workers. They have a lot of workers in New York City, especially academic workers. And Sean Fain did this wonderful endorsement of Zoran. So, I mean, some of these unions are going to have to look themselves in the mirror, those that supported Cuomo, and I expect some of them to come over. So it's going to be hard to defeat Zoran in November, but they're going to try.
But don't you think, just in these final 3 or 4 minutes that we have here, there's something in the atmosphere that has changed, Jeff Cohen. Something, you know, they call it the spirit of the times, the zeitgeist. Something has changed, and we're not going to go back.
Yeah.
When you've got a Mamdani, when you have a Brandon Johnson, quite frankly, you have some people who are really looking to service the needs of the people, and they're willing to go outside. And in fact, they have to go outside of the margins for their support. Yeah.
Well, and keep in mind, I know a little bit about Chicago. I followed New York City a lot closer. You know, there's going to be a very anti-Zoran news media. The New York Times claimed they were no longer going to endorse in local races, and then they wrote this vicious editorial calling Mamdani uniquely unsuited. Many New Yorkers are understandably disappointed by the Democratic field. No, we had record turnout. It was the editorial board of the New York Times that was disappointed that Zoran Mamdani might win, and he did.
So, did you have record turnout before Election Day?
Yes. You mean early voting?
Early voting.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, as I say, 1/4 of the early voters were first time voters, but it's going to go over a million. And last 4 years ago, I think the total vote was 940,000. This is a record. The people in New York are enthused by their Democratic field, even though it disappointed the New York Times. So, I mean, these mayors who want to do good things run up against a corporate media that's often, it's often Democratic Party oriented, but these corporate outlets are in the right wing of the Democratic Party. They're in the corporate wing. That's what the New York Times is, the corporate wing of the Democratic Party. So if he does get elected, he'll have some bad media coverage, but he's got such a mastery of social media that he can get his message out to New Yorkers about what he's doing, even if the mainstream media distorts it. And let me end on this one note. We once ran a speech that Harold Washington gave when he was the mayor of Chicago, and it was about what's wrong with today. And it was to the Publishers Association, I believe. And, what's wrong with press coverage of our cities? And he basically said, well, you own real estate in downtown, but your editors come here to work, and then they go out to the suburbs to live, and they seem to be looking for suburban voters and suburban readers, and they don't cover the city fairly. And he gave a great speech to the Publishers Association because he was having trouble with the mainstream media, as popular as Harold was.
What is the lesson that we can learn nationally? I'm going to have India Walton and John Nichols on in a few more hours.
Yeah.
But you tell me, how can we iterate this or reiterate this nationally?
Yeah, because of social media, Zoran's message has gone way beyond New York City. So I think young people are going to realize, wow, maybe we can do this in our city, in our town. So I think the message is a political figure with a clear pro-working class, pro-youth message, pro-diversity message. And then you use social media to mobilize, no matter what the corporate media says about your candidate. It's a winning strategy. It won here in New York City. I believe it's going to succeed again in November with obstacles that we must surmount. But I think people are going to see that this can be replicated in other cities and states. And obviously, we need to replicate it in November 2026 and take back the House. And if Jeffries is in the way, he should get out of the way. If Jeffries can't be part of this, so we're going to see within a week or two what's going on here with the Democratic leaders. It's coincidental, it's happenstance that the two Democratic leaders in this country both are from New York City. And as Rania mentioned, Zoran won the district of Hakeem Jeffries. Hakeem Jeffries just is not giving us the leadership that is needed. He's mealy-mouthed. He wasn't even using the word unconstitutional when Trump bombed Iran, when so many Democratic Congress members were. So I think the smoke will clear in a week or two. And this Zoran Mamdani victory is sending a message, and we have to see how the Democratic leadership is going to react.
Jeff Cohen, rootsaction.org. I tell you what, pretty close to being prophetic.
Yeah.
Actually, you know what? When you follow the people and you not the money, this is what you get. You get the truth. And people, I think, Jeff Cohen, are waking up and they are believing in themselves. I think that's what you saw with that burst of activity, of this burst of enthusiasm for Mamdani. It was always there, but when they believed that they could win, that's when you saw all of these people begin to come out. Hey, I heard someone say, keep hope alive.
Yeah.
And I also heard that man say, never surrender. Keep
right.
on.
And that need to believe is what your dad was so brilliant at conveying to people that were being oppressed, discriminated against. You got to take action. You can't just wither. You have to believe that collectively, if we take action, we can make things better. I think young people have that. And they finally had a political candidate besides Bernie and AOC and some of the ones in New York that are open democratic socialists and are winning elections, state Senate, state assembly, and U.S. Congress.
Well, you know what? I tell you what, I can't just put it on Reverend. I have to give it to you, Jeff Cohen, you, Norman Solomon, all of Roots Action. And then now you've got Indy Walton, you've got Sam Rosenthal, you've got a lot of other people who are coming behind you because you believe and you help us to think critically. Fairness and accuracy in reporting.
Yeah.
Understand the media. You help us to understand that we can take action at the bottom level. And I tell you, I had no idea that AOC and Bernie are the top fundraisers for the party. Yeah, that's why they don't mention that in corporate media, but the reason they're mentioned in corporate media is because that is true.
Yeah, it's all small donor. All right, I'll see you.
Much love to you.
Bye-bye, Santita.
All right, everybody. Second
Okay.
hour, let's talk about the IAEA and who has overtaken that. Who has overtaken that? The people who really help us understand who's got the nukes. Yeah, well, that agency has been overtaken by the West. And now we're on the verge of, we're still in the midst of a crisis with Iran and Israel and the United States. We've got to talk about that here on the Santita Jackson Show. Stay tuned for more in the second hour. Switch on over, everybody. AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota.